What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming. The Atlantic in winter is not merely a body of water. It is a wilderness without borders, an endless expanse where the horizon swallows men whole and returns them as silence. Sailors who venture into its heart know this truth. The ocean is not a road but a riddle, one written in the language of storms, currents, and unseen depths. It is here, in this boundless void, that a ship once drifted like an abandoned thought, the Mary Celeste. The tale of the Mary Celeste has been told 1,000 ways. It has been dressed in rational clothes, stitched into maritime reports, bound in newspapers, and whispered in taverns from New York to Genoa. And yet, none of these garments have ever fit comfortably. The ship remains naked in its mystery, shivering in the winds of speculation, because the absence it left behind cannot be clothed in certainty. She was a brigantine, lean and sharp, built to move across oceans. On November 7, 1872, she left New York Harbor under the command of Captain Benjamin Briggs, a man of discipline and devotion. His wife, Sarah, accompanied him, as did their 2-year-old daughter Sophia. Alongside them were 7 sailors, all experienced, none burdened with a reputation for mutiny or madness. Their cargo was simple yet dangerous, nearly 2,000 barrels of industrial alcohol. Bound for Genoa, from her departure, the Mary Celeste slipped into history as if into fog. Weeks later, on December 4th, the British ship Dei Gratia spotted her drifting aimlessly some 400 miles east of the Azores. Her sails were ragged, her course crooked, but she was not wrecked. She floated with a stubborn buoyancy, a shell waiting to be entered. When the men of the Dei Gratia boarded her, they found what should never have been found: the cargo intact, the provisions plentiful, the crew's belongings untouched. The ship's log ended abruptly, as though the last word had been swallowed midst. The lifeboat was gone. The crew had vanished, not in storm, not in fire, not in battle, simply vanished. Yet what chilled the boarding party most was not the emptiness, it was what they thought they saw. As their boat drew near, some swore they glimpsed figures on deck, indistinct shapes, silhouettes pacing the rail, a woman in a pale dress, a man who turned his head toward them. They hailed the figures, but no answer came, and when they climbed aboard, the deck was bare, the air thick with absence. From that moment, the Mary Celeste ceased to be a ship. She became a symbol. To sailors, she was a reminder that the sea is not merely water, but a kingdom of ghosts. To storytellers, she was a blank page on which to scroll fear. To those of us who dwell in the shadowed realms of the supernatural, she is proof that the sea keeps not only the bodies of men, but also their echoes, their unfinished selves, their restless shades. But to understand why the Mary Celeste is more than a maritime mystery, we must go deeper. We must step not only into her decks, but into the very marrow of her legend. Because a ghost ship is never simply a vessel without a crew. It is a mirror, a stage, and a confession, and the Mary Celeste confesses more than most. The Mary Celeste began her life under another name, the Amazon. Born in Nova Scotia in 1861, she carried with her a strange gravity of misfortune even in infancy. Her first captain died within days of her maiden voyage, as though the vessel resisted mastery. Later, she collided with another ship, the Hawk, in the English Channel. Each mishap was noted with unease, but sailors are practical men. Ships scrape, captains die, the sea does not coddle. Still, whispers grew. When the ship was sold to American owners in 1868 and renamed Mary Celeste, some said the rechristening was an attempt to wash her of her bad luck, but others knew better. Names are not erasers, they are invitations. To rename a ship is to stir the forces that dwell in its wood and sail, to invite old spirits to test the resolve of new owners. The Mary Celeste carried not only cargo but a weight that pressed unseen upon those who touched her helm. Captain Briggs, however, was no man to bow to superstition. He was devout, disciplined, and respected. He believed in providence, not curses. Perhaps that was his undoing. Before the Mary Celeste was ever found adrift, the sea had already written her into its script. For the Atlantic is not passive, it is not backdrop. It is character, ancient, implacable, both cradle and grave. When ships vanish, the ocean does not explain, it simply absorbs. But sometimes, rarely, it leaves something behind, a trace, a ghost, a half-answer that is worse than silence. Imagine standing on her empty deck, the sails shivering in weak wind, the rigging creaking like bones. The horizon is endless, the sky iron. You feel watched, though no eyes are visible. You step into the captain's cabin, his clothes neatly folded, his wife's shoes by the bed, the child's toy tucked in a corner, life frozen, abandoned mid. It is here that reason begins to fray. For how can absence feel so present? How can silence speak so loudly? The Mary Celeste was not wrecked. She was arrested, as though some unseen tribunal had plucked her crew from existence and left the ship as evidence. Throughout history, sailors have whispered of ghost ships, vessels seen gliding across the horizon only to vanish when approached. Ships ablaze with phantom fire. The Flying Dutchman cursed his sail forever, unable to make port. These tales serve as warnings, metaphors for doom, but the Mary Celeste is different. She was not seen vanishing. She was seen, touched, boarded. She was real, and yet unreal. The archetype of the ghost ship took flesh in her timbers. She was proof that the supernatural need not wear chains or howl in graveyards. Sometimes it wears sails and drifts across the Atlantic. Sometimes it carries a child's laughter that is no longer there. The crew of the Daguerreotypes who found her were practical men. They had no wish to embellish their tale, for maritime law would scrutinize their every word. To claim they saw ghosts would have risked ridicule, and yet, in hushed tones, in private moments, they admitted it. Figures on deck, shadows pacing, not hallucinations, not mirages, but presences. One sailor later wrote that when he first stepped aboard, he felt as though he had intruded upon a space that was not empty, but occupied in another register of existence. The air was heavy, charged, as though a storm had passed, not through the sky but through the soul of the ship itself. What happened to them? This question circles like a gull, never landing, never answering. Theories abound: alcohol fumes igniting fear, mutiny disguised as disappearance, piracy, natural disaster, but none satisfied. Because the deeper truth is that the Mary Celeste is not merely a question of what happened, but of what remains. For the ship did not simply drift once. She drifted through decades of retelling, through centuries of superstition, until she became something larger than herself. She became a vessel of fear itself. And when people claim they see figures on her deck, even now, long after her bones rotted on Haitian reefs, it is not delusion, it is recognition. The Mary Celeste is no longer wood and sail. She is archetype, she is haunting, she is the sea reminding us that nothing ever truly disappears. It only changes form. Thus begins the voyage. Thus begins the descent into a story that is not merely maritime but metaphysical. In the chapters that follow, we will enter the realm of the supernatural more fully. We will walk her decks in the dead of night, listen to the whispers in her rigging, feel the press of spirits against our skin. We will allow the Mary Celeste to reveal herself not as a mystery to be solved, but as a haunting to be endured. For some ships are built to carry cargo, others are built to carry souls, and some rare, terrible, unforgettable, are built to carry stories that will never end. The Mary Celeste is one of these. The Mary Celeste drifts. She has always drifted, even when ropes held her to a dock, even when men stood upon her deck with the assurance of command. For some vessels, the keel is not enough to anchor them to the world. The Mary Celeste was such a vessel, a ship never fully belonging to the living, never fully claimed by the sea. When the crew of the Daguerreotypes stepped aboard in December 1872, they believed they had found an abandoned merchant brig. They were wrong. What they had found was a stage where absence performed its theater, where silence spoke in voices not of this earth. One sailor, whose name has been lost to most accounts but remembered in whispers, later confessed he felt the ship resist his touch. The moment his boots struck the planks of the Mary Celeste, a sensation coursed up his legs, like stepping into ground not meant to hold the living. He said it was as though the ship herself exhaled against him, a breath cold and stale, heavy with the residue of lives removed. In the galley, bread was half-baked dough stiffening in its pan. In the captain's cabin, a sewing kit lay open, a thread pulled but not knotted. In the logbook, ink trailed off, as if the quill had been snatched from a hand mid. These were not remnants of panic, but of interruption, as though time itself had been wrenched apart. One sailor claimed he heard footsteps overhead, firm and deliberate, though no man was above. Another swore he saw a lantern swinging in the rigging, glowing with a sickly hue, yet when he climbed, there was nothing but frayed rope and empty air. They tried to laugh it off, these hardened men of the sea. But when night fell, laughter curdled into dread. Darkness at sea is not the darkness of land. It is not absence of light. It is possession by void. On that first night aboard the Mary Celeste, the crew of the Dei Gratia tried to sleep in shifts, though unease gnawed at them. One awoke to the sound of a child's laughter, high, brittle, echoing through the timbers. He thought perhaps it was the wind, but when he pressed his ear against the bulkhead, he swore he heard tiny footsteps scampering away. Another claimed that in the faint moonlight, he saw a woman standing near the bow, her dress fluttering though the air was still. She turned her face toward him, and her eyes were not eyes but hollows filled with the sea. They did not speak of these things openly, for fear makes cowards of even the boldest sailors. But each man carried the mark of that night. The disappearance of Captain Briggs and his family gnaws at history, not only because of its mystery, but because of its intimacy. A husband, a wife, a child, not faceless sailors but a family, dissolved into the Atlantic as though erased from God's own ledger. Some believe it is their spirits that haunt the Mary Celeste. Sarah Briggs, in her pale dress, searching endlessly for her daughter, Sophia, her laughter running along the planks like a tide that never recedes. The crew, silhouettes pacing the deck, bound to their posts even in death. But others whisper of something older, something not of them, but upon them, that the Mary Celeste did not create her ghosts, but carried them, like barnacles on her hull. From the moment she first touched water. Seafarers know of places in the ocean where compasses spin and time falters. The Sargasso Sea, with its endless mats of weed, has been called a floating graveyard of ships. The Bermuda Triangle, infamous for swallowing vessels without trace. The waters near the Azores, where the Mary Celeste was found, are no less strange. In maritime lore, there are entities that cling to ships, spirits of the drowned, demons of the deep, echoes of storms. Some vessels are said to be cursed by their very timber, wood cut from haunted forests, or nailed together with iron smelted under blood moon. The Mary Celeste may have been such a vessel. Her early misfortunes were not coincidence but foreshadowing, a warning written in splinter and sail. By the time Captain Briggs took command, she was already claimed. Accounts that surfaced years later speak of men who sailed her after her discovery. They spoke of whispers rising from the hold at night, as though the barrels of alcohol breathed. They spoke of seeing figures moving across the deck, only to vanish when approached. Some said they heard prayers in languages they did not know, murmured by invisible mouths. Others felt hands brush their shoulders, cold and damp, leaving no mark but terror. One captain who later commanded her swore he would never sleep in her cabin again, after waking to find the imprint of another body in his bed, the sheets indented as though by someone who had lain beside him, breathing softly. He left the cabin that night and never returned. It is tempting to think of the Mary Celeste as an ordinary ship touched by extraordinary circumstance. But there is another way, to see her as an extraordinary ship that drew ordinary people into her orbit, only to consume them. She was not the stage 4 haunting, but the haunting itself. A ghost ship, after all, does not require ghosts in the plural. Sometimes the vessel itself is the ghost. The Mary Celeste, in this telling, was a body animated not by wood and sail, but by some essence of the sea, some hunger for souls. Why else would her crew vanish without trace, without struggle, without explanation? Why else would men continue to see figures aboard her decades later, even after her final wreck? The Mary Celeste was not abandoned. She was inhabited. Imagine walking her deck alone at night. The boards creak beneath your weight, but then you realize the creak does not stop when you stop. Another step follows, perfectly timed, as though shadowing you. You turn, and nothing is there. You hear the sound of water dripping, steady, rhythmic. You follow it into the hold, where barrels line the dark. You find no leak, no pool, no drip, yet the sound continues, echoing around you, as if mocking your search. You climb back to the deck, heart quickened, and there she is, a child, no taller than your knee, standing by the rail. Her dress is white, her face pale. She lifts her hand as if to wave. You blink, and she is gone. This is the Mary Celeste, a ship where absence takes form, where silence invents voices, where memory itself becomes a haunting. When the men of the Dei Gratia sailed the Mary Celeste into Gibraltar for inquiry, they carried not only the ship, but the weight of what they had experienced. In the official record, they said nothing of ghosts, but in private, their voices trembled. They knew what they had brought to shore was not just timber and sail, but something that clung, invisible, insistent. Fear, like cargo, can be loaded and unloaded. The Mary Celeste carried it wherever she went. Each new crew felt it. Each new owner lost faith. Her reputation darkened until no man wished to helm her. She was sold and sold again, each handoff an exorcism attempt, each voyage another chapter of unease, thought. And yet, her story does not end here, for the Mary Celeste was not content to haunt quietly. She was building, gathering, waiting. The whispers would grow louder, the visions sharper, the sense of dread unbearable. By the time she met her final wreck off Haiti, she had become more ghost than ship. But before her bones settled beneath tropical waves, before her name became legend, she would demand her climax. The sea is patient, but ghosts are not. The Mary Celeste wanted more, and what she wanted, she would take. The Mary Celeste had always whispered, but whispers are only the beginning. Whispers prepare the ear, soften the mind, make room for the shout. What came after was not silence but a roar, the roar of the unseen, the roar of the sea's tribunal claiming its due. By the time the de Gratias sailors abandoned their temporary command of her, each man knew in his bones, the Mary Celeste was no longer merely a ship. She was judgment afloat, and those who touched her timbers became witnesses to a trial without end. It began with shadows that did not obey the sun. On deck at midday, when the Atlantic shimmered under hard light, silhouettes stretched in directions impossible, bending toward the prow when the sun was at the stern, lengthening when no man stood to cast them. A sailor, young and strong, tried to chase his shadow to prove his courage, only to watch it detach and slip into the rigging like smoke. He never laughed again. At night, the crew heard voices, not the shrill cry of gulls or the groan of timber, but clear speech arguments in a tongue none recognized. Orders shouted, prayers muttered, a lullaby sung in broken cadence. The voices came from the hold, from the mast, from the waves themselves slapping against the hull. And then came the smell, not rot, not mildew, but the acrid sting of burning alcohol. Though no flame was visible, it lingered in the air, searing the throat, clinging to the skin. Some swore the barrels below were sweating, not liquid, but blood, seeping through the wood like the cargo had been transformed. One midnight, beneath a moon smudged by clouds, the men on watch saw a figure on the quarterdeck, tall, rigid, hands clasped behind his back. Captain Briggs. He stood as though surveying a crew that was no longer there. His face was pale as bleached canvas, his eyes hollow but commanding. He turned slowly, meeting the gaze of the living sailors who trembled before him. When one whispered his name, the figure raised a hand in warning, and then he was gone, leaving only the scent of salt and the echo of boots upon wood. It was not the image of a man lost at sea, it was the image of a man bound to command, even after death. On nights when the sea lay calm, men heard her laughter, thin and piercing, weaving through the rigging like thread. Sometimes it came from the captain's cabin, sometimes from the lifeboat davits, sometimes from the open sky itself. Sailors turned their heads quickly, hoping to see nothing. But too often they saw something, a small figure darting between barrels, a pale hand gripping the rail, eyes wide and unblinking, staring from the shadows. Once a sailor entered the cabin to find a doll seated upright on the bed, its porcelain face cracked, its painted eyes glinting in the lantern's light. He fled, but when others returned to look, the doll was gone. No one spoke of it again. The sea, they knew, holds many children, but none play so insistently as the one who cannot leave. The climax of the haunting came not in sights or sounds, but in control. One helmsman, steering through a patch of calm sea, found his hands locked on the wheel, unable to release. He claimed a force gripped him, steering not toward Jawor, not toward Gibraltar, but into the open Atlantic, away from land, away from salvation. Only when another sailor struck him across the face did his hands release, leaving bloodied indentations on the wheel where his grip had been too strong for flesh alone. Another man awoke screaming, his mouth filled with salt water though he had not left his bunk. His lungs heaved, choking, as though he had drowned in his sleep. They revived him, but his eyes were glazed, and from that night he muttered only in whispers, words no one understood, phrases that did not belong to any tongue of men. Possession is not always full, not always violent. Sometimes it is subtle, a suggestion, a dream placed in the mind. Yet on the Mary Celeste, it grew like a tide, pulling at each soul. threatening to sweep them into an abyss of will not their own. Mariners often speak of the ocean as a judge, a force that weighs courage and folly alike. But what the men aboard the Mary Celeste felt was not nature's indifference, it was intent. They began to believe they had stumbled into a tribunal, that the ship itself was the courtroom, and they, unwilling jurors. The presiding judge was unseen, perhaps the ocean, perhaps something deeper, older. The evidence, the silence of the missing, the verdict, not yet delivered. Every creak of timber was a gavel, every wave against the hull, a testimony. The men lived not in voyage but in trial. Their breaths arguments, their fear the sentence, and always, the feeling that eyes watched from the masts, the rails, the clouds, eyes not human, not kind. One by one, they dreamed, dreams so vivid they were indistinguishable from waking. In these dreams, they stood on deck as the sea rose up, higher and higher, until it swallowed them whole. They felt lungs fill, hearts still, limbs thrash. They awoke gasping, soaked in sweat, sometimes with water trickling from their lips, as though they had truly drowned. A pattern emerged. Each man dreamed the same sequence, each in turn, each night, until they realized they were not dreaming their own deaths. They were dreaming the deaths of the vanished crew. To relive another's drowning is torment. To relive it nightly is damnation. The climax arrived one stormless night, when the sea lay flat as glass and the sky pressed low with stars. The men gathered on deck, unable to sleep, bound by a common dread. And then it began, a sound like 1,000 whispers rising from the hold, a chill spreading upward through the planks, a wind that came not from any direction but from within the ship herself. Figures emerged, not solid, not vapor, but something between. The crew of the Mary Celeste, pale and drenched, their faces blank, their eyes wide with accusation. Sarah Briggs holding Sophia, the child's face twisted in both laughter and scream. Captain Briggs at the fore, hand raised, commanding silence. The sailors of the day Gratia fell to their knees, some praying, some cursing, some unable to breathe. The apparitions moved across the deck, reenacting motions of work long abandoned, hoisting sails that were not there, scrubbing planks with hands that dissolved through wood, calling to one another in voices drowned long ago. For minutes, or hours, or eternities, the scene played, and then, one by one, the figures turned toward the living, eyes empty yet piercing. They opened their mouths in unison, and from them came the roar of the sea itself, a sound so vast it shook marrow and split sanity. The men fled, abandoning the deck, locking themselves below, but the roar filled every crevice. The tribunal had spoken. Its language was terror, its sentence was knowledge. The Mary Celeste was no ship. She was a wound in the ocean, a portal through which the living glimpsed the unendurable. When the roar finally subsided, dawn broke calm and still. The ship looked ordinary again, but none of the men ever were. The Mary Celeste continued to sail, continued to change hands, continued to rot toward her end, but those who touched her knew she carried something eternal. By the time she was run aground off Haiti in 1885, a wreck claimed for insurance, she had already transcended timber and rope. She was no longer a vessel but a myth incarnate, and myths do not sink. The tribunal of the sea had spoken, but the verdict was not closure. It was perpetuity. The Mary Celeste would haunt forever. The Mary Celeste is gone now. The sea swallowed her bones off the coast of Haiti in 1885, splintering her timbers into coral and silt. To the eye, she no longer exists. Yet disappearance is not erasure. In truth, she became more alive in death than she ever was afloat. The ghost of a ship is not measured in planks and sails, but in stories, stories that drift farther, last longer, cut deeper. And in this, the Mary Celeste is immortal. What makes her linger is not merely that she was found empty, it is that she was found too empty. A derelict ship is not uncommon in maritime history. Storms, mutinies, disease, all leave their wreckage behind. But the Mary Celeste presented the one scenario men fear most. No bodies, no blood, no sign of struggle, only the vacuum of absence. The mind abhors a vacuum. When the sea leaves no answers, we pour our own into the void. Ghosts thrive where explanations fail. Each theory, piracy, explosion, storm, mutiny, dissolves under scrutiny, leaving behind only one conclusion that fits the human psyche. The crew did not leave by choice. They were taken. By whom, or by what, remains the question that has gnawed for over a century. From taverns in New England to lecture halls in London, from dime novels to solemn academic journals, the Mary Celeste has been summoned again and again. She appears in stories told by candlelight, in seances where mediums swear they hear her crew calling, in plays and films and whispered bedtime tales that leave children staring at ceilings long into the night. Arthur Conan Doyle once wrote a fictionalized account of her fate, and in doing so, propelled her deeper into the bloodstream of folklore. Yet even he could not tame her mystery. His version was only another mask, another shroud. Every retelling multiplies her. Each imagination that touches her builds another phantom layer. The ship that once drifted silently on the Atlantic now drifts endlessly through culture, carrying not only her lost crew, but every fear we project onto her decks. Why does the Mary Celeste haunt more fiercely than ships sunk with cannon fire, more deeply than wrecks stacked with corpses? Because she is not death, she is absence, and absence is more terrifying than death. Death at least concludes. A body is buried, a grave is marked, a life is written into past tense. Absence keeps the verb tense open. The crew of the Mary Celeste are not dead, not alive, but missing, and missing is a category the human soul cannot catalogue. To stare at the Mary Celeste is to stare at our own fragility, that we, too, might vanish, leaving only the ghost of our footprints on deck, the echo of our voices in the wind, the smell of our breath in the air. That life might not end with punctuation, but with an ellipsis. Even after her wreck, reports continued. Sailors in the Atlantic swore they saw her silhouette on misty mornings, sails tattered yet upright, gliding without crew. They hailed her, received no reply, and when they blinked, she was gone. Others claimed to see figures on phantom decks, a captain pacing, a woman clutching a child, shadows that waved from the rail before dissolving into sea spray. The Mary Celeste does not need her physical body to haunt. She is now spectral, a ghost ship in every sense, appearing where fear demands and vanishing where reason tries to follow. To speak of the Mary Celeste is to speak of ourselves. The story reminds us that certainty is a luxury we rarely possess. We crave closure, but the world offers none. We demand explanations, but silence is often the truest answer. The Mary Celeste whispers that we live adrift, that our certainties are planks nailed to an ocean too vast, too indifferent to hold. One wave, one gust, one mystery, and the deck beneath us is empty. Our companions gone, our names swallowed by salt. Perhaps that is why her legend grows, not fades. Each generation sees its own reflection in her absence. Sailors in the 19th century feared mutiny and storms. Victorians saw omens of morality. Modern audiences see the terror of vanishing without record in an age of constant record-keeping. The ship is not static. She is a mirror that shifts with time. There is one detail that persists across the darker ghost tales: the sound of the child. Some say that in certain parts of the Atlantic, when the sea is unnaturally calm, one can hear faint laughter riding the wind. Not the laughter of joy, but the fractured, glassy laughter of something interrupted, something unfinished. Fishermen claim it comes from beneath the water, as though the ocean itself carries the child's last breath upward. Passengers on night voyages whisper they hear footsteps racing down passageways of ships that are not theirs, always light, always quick, always vanishing at the turn of a head. It is not the captain's authority, nor the sailor's work songs, nor even the mother's prayers that carry forward most strongly. It is the child. 4 children symbolize futures that never arrive, beginnings without ends. And in haunting, nothing is more powerful than the promise that is forever broken. Today, the Mary Celeste rests nowhere. She is splintered, scattered, her wood perhaps buried in sand or eaten by worms. But her wake, the disturbance she left on the surface of human thought, rolls on endlessly. We are all, in some sense, sailing behind her. Every tale of a ghost ship, every story of vanished planes, every modern mystery of disappearance echoes her. She's the archetype, the dark mother of all vanishings, and she does not release us, because to tell her story is to admit that we will never know, to admit that perhaps knowing is impossible, that perhaps the universe itself contains gulfs as silent, as final, as the deck of the Mary Celeste on that December day in 1872. Picture her now, sails ragged, timbers creaking, drifting across a sea of ink. No crew upon the deck, yet footsteps echo. No lanterns burning, yet a pale glow suffuses her hull. At the prow, a captain gazes ahead into a horizon, no map charts. Beside him, a woman clutches a child who is laughing and screaming in the same breath. Behind them, sailors move in endless repetition, performing tasks that no longer matter. The Mary Celeste sails on, not through the Atlantic, not through time, but through us, through every retelling, every shiver, every midnight thought that wonders where our own certainties end. The sea keeps her secret, the ship keeps her silence, the ghosts keep their vigil, and we, the living, keep watching.